Hi everybody, this is Michael Hildebrandt and I'm your host on the Sleeptrust podcast, where I'm talking about how to gain back trust in your ability to have a superb sleep again. In this week's episode of the Sleeptrust podcast, we are going to talk about willpower. And willpower is super essential if we want to improve our sleep or any other aspect of our life, because if we want to do so, we have to get into change. And change means uncomfort, and there is no such thing as us walking through uncomfort without us having willpower. That said, willpower is something like an engine starter, so you need it to get going, and on certain times you will need it to kind of restart the engine. But it's not the single one thing that will get you there. So it's often a misunderstood concept. And I'm going to walk you through how we cannot and how we want to see and use and utilize willpower to achieve a better sleep, but also how we can make this process so much easier. I want to start off with positioning us in an understanding mindset of what willpower is and why it is so important. If you think about our daily actions and who we are, what we are, 95% of what we do every day is subconsciously driven. So it's in our mind. We do not take conscious decisions. We get up, we brush our teeth, we do, whatever we do, and 95% of these actions are unconsciously because they're pre-wired in our brains. And it doesn't matter where we're standing right now, if we're having a fantastic life, everything is running great, or if we're having a miserable life, everything's running bad, or for most of us, somewhere in between. This is just how it works. And if we want to change things, which we can. We've got our prefrontal cortex in our brains, and we've got the ability to take a conscious decision and to follow through on that. But if we want to do so, this will cost our brains energy and will move us out of the space that we know, leaving us with a feeling of uncomfort and sometimes overwhelm, fear, which will pull us back into the patterns that we know. So willpower is essentially the force that can drive us out of this old pattern, because even if you're feeling uncomfortable where you are, you're feeling miserable, you are to a certain degree feeling comfortable with living in a life that you know. And this is super tricky from a psychology perspective. You would think, okay, I'm feeling bad, I want to feel good, I'm just going to change that. No. Our brains work differently. They're going to pull you back to where you are because they know that this is a safe place. You may be feeling miserable, but you're safe. You know how you feel and you know what's going to happen. So this is what our brains want to keep us, our unconscious brains want to pull us into back again. And willpower is just this super gift that we all have to take a conscious decision and to move out of this space, knowing that it will be a little bit, let's call it exhausting maybe at times. It will be fearful, it can be overwhelming, it can be all of this, but we have the ability to change. And willpower is just this force to light up that engine and to give us the power to step out of this comfort zone. And here comes the good news, because I know that many of us think that we need to have a super strong willpower to be able to achieve goals. And this is simply not true. We need our willpower. Everybody needs it to light up that engine, as said. But super successful people have been interviewed, and there have been surveys, and there have been studies, and they do not have or use more willpower than you, me. They just align the process after using it in a better and more intelligent way. And I'm going to walk through that in a couple of weeks to show you how you can do that and make change easier. But today we're talking about willpower. So it's super important to understand willpower is just that thing to light up that engine, to start the change. and to maybe, restart your engine when you're on the way, but you don't want to restart it every 5 minutes. And you will not reach your goal if you try to work with willpower exclusively. Your engine will break down at some point. You're going to get a burnout. You're going to get, whatever you can imagine on your own. I don't want to build up scarcity here or something, but it's not going to get you to your goal, not exclusively. And what I want to share with you right now is my mindset and my understanding of willpower in general. First off, I think we are all super gifted and should be thankful for the fact that we are able to consciously choose things. And we should really use this tool to improve our lives. So I'm deeply thankful that I can decide if I want to record this podcast or if I want to do something else. I've got the free decision. So that's number one. We should all be really thankful that we have this power, because this gives us hope to change any situation that we are in right now. And the second thing, that's kind of the mindset that I have in the usage of willpower, is that for me, if I use my willpower, I often relate it and combine it with a promise to myself. So if I want to do something and I know I want to use my willpower to do something, I will literally promise to myself that I'm going to follow through on that. Because if we don't do what we tell ourselves that we're going to do, we are just not going to be reliable to the most important person that we have in our lives, which we are essentially ourselves. And if you cannot rely on your own decisions, if you cannot rely on what you tell yourself, how can you build up trust in yourself? How can you build up sleep trust? It's simply not possible. So we all fall over the cliff every now and again. That just belongs to life. There's no point in bashing yourself about that. But if you think about willpower and if you consciously decide to use your willpower, I often combine it with a promise to myself and say, I will do this. And to not overcommit, because this is, I think, probably the biggest mistake that most of us make from time to time, to overcommit and say, I'm going to, quit smoking forever tomorrow, whatever. You can do that. I know people who did it exactly that way. And I kind of did it like that too, after I fell off the cliff many, many times. But I wasn't that experienced in changing habits at that time. Today, I would start with little promises. So let's just take a simple example of avoiding using your smartphone when you're sitting in your bed, or electronic devices in general. What you want to do is not to say, I'm not going to do that anymore, or you could, if you feel that this is okay, but you really want to tap into the feeling, are you sure? Can you promise that you can do this for an entire year or for your entire life? Or is that span just too big for you to promise, to make a real promise to yourself? So a thing that you can do is just reduce it and say, okay, could I promise this to myself to follow through on this for a week? Maybe too long too. So can I do this for 3 days? Or why not just start with 1 day? Why don't I promise to myself that I'm going to do this tonight? Tonight, I will not use my smartphone. Is that achievable? I bet it feels different to promise something like that to yourself than to promise that you're going to do this for the entire year. So reduce things to the ridiculous. Get them so tiny, small, that you 100% know that you can do this promise, that you can make this promise to yourself, and that way you will follow through. You will not only strengthen your willpower, you will get and be reliable to yourself. That will give you more self-confidence to change things, and overall you will improve your abilities to change things. And by the way, all these techniques that I'm sharing with you are things that not only I use, but that essentially all successful people use, that I know. You get tons of books that you can read about habits, willpower, and so on. And you're going to find all of that stuff in there too. But these are the things that I personally use and that have proven for me to work. So that was tip number 1. and you're going to get 2 more power tips. So tip number 2 is essentially a technique that will help you to not only evaluate more if you are able to give that promise to yourself, but it will also make it so much easier to actually do it. And it's just due to how our brains work. What we are going to do is that we're going to visualize the situation in advance. So let's say you want to avoid, we're going to just stick with the example of avoiding the electronic devices in the bedroom. And we want to do that. So what we want to do now is to run through the entire situation in our minds. So you want to close your eyes. Don't do it if you're sitting in the car, or don't even in particular do it when you're listening to this podcast. Do it later on and pick your own example. Close your eyes. You just need 1 or 2 minutes, and then run through the situation, run through your evening, and see yourself doing this stuff only in your mind. And the magical thing that is true for our brains is that it doesn't really differentiate between what we imagine and what really happens. So running through this experience of avoiding electronic devices will not only give us the feeling if we are able to do this, because you're going to get a clear signal, and you can run through the example and modify stuff to make it easier in your mind. So you will get the feedback if you are ready for a promise. And the second thing is that you actually start to build a new habit, a new pattern in your brain without even having to do that. And this is pure magic. And I'm going to give you a little bit an enhanced technique next week, this podcast, when we're going to talk about the cold shower, which I'm going to come up with later on. But for this example, just sit down, visualize, run through the process, see yourself getting ready for bed, go to bed. You don't use devices. Maybe you're going to unplug your TV or stuff like that. Get friction into the things that make it uncomfortable. Put away that, the remote control. Don't take your smartphone into your bedroom, or at least put it into flight mode. See all these little details in your mind and go to bed and see yourself falling asleep without that. And running through this process, do it once, twice, 3 times, you'll know when you're ready, is just so powerful. You get the feedback, as said, if you are able to follow through on your promise that you might yet now make. And you will also already prepare your neurons for the new habit, for the thing that will make it so much easier and will require less willpower when the real situation shows up at nighttime. So that's power tip number 2, really powerful. And power tip number 3 is to actually get and have an accountability partner that you share what you are planning to do with, and that you ask if he or she could check that you really did it. And this is super powerful for many of us, and don't ask me why this is the case. I could come up with a couple of theories I've heard, but I'm just going to save our time here. For many of us, it is more important to follow through on promises that we give to others than we give to ourselves. A little bit sad, but true. And we can utilize this power just informing, you could inform everybody over Facebook that you're doing this. That way you're going to have tremendous amounts of social pressure, but it's enough to ask your spouse or to tell, a friend and ask him or her to keep you accountable on what you actually want to perform. And these are 3 power tips that you can easily implement right away. Start off with small things, build up trust, build up reliability to yourself in using that willpower. And in the weeks to come, I will show you more and more techniques and how to really follow through and achieve your goals, your sleep goals. I hope you already wrote down and created your sleep goal card for this year. If not, think about listening to last week's episode and create a goal card for yourself. This is kind of the frame. And then we're going to work our way through. I'm going to give you a lot of advice here in the podcast the next couple of weeks before we turn over to the more entertaining and informative part again. This is more the coaching part, where my heart is really, glowing and pumping to help you to improve your life, your sleep quality. And I know that we can rip this off together. And just to underline how important willpower is for us if we want to improve our sleep, it's part of every single coaching session that I do. And it is also part, or an essential part, of my online course that will help you to sleep better. And it's part of the mindset block. So there are 3 blocks. The mindset is laying out the foundation in our minds. Then we're going to practice a little bit. It's playing around with the tools that we get and have and can use. And then we're getting stuff habitual in the last part. So it's 9 modules. And the very first module of this course is all around willpower. And before you look for this course at sleeptrust.eu, you should know that it's not available at the moment. It's getting revamped. I'm optimizing a couple of parts of it, but the essential structure is still the same, and willpower is the first and a very powerful module. With that, let's wrap up this week's episode of the Sleep Trust podcast. If we want to improve our sleep, willpower is the number one tool that we want to use to get that change started. A common misconception about willpower is that we need to have a strong will to be able to implement these changes into our lives. I shared 3 tools with you that will make it very easy and streamlined for you to get into using willpower the right way, which are to reduce things to the ridiculous, to visualize the changes that you are planning in advance, and to keep accountable to others about your changes that you are going to do. And that's it for this week's episode of the Sleep Trust podcast. I hope you enjoyed yourself and that you tune in next week when we are going to talk about how a cold shower can not only help you to strengthen your willpower, but also let you sleep better. Until then, have a superb sleep. Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Sleep Trust podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want to get further information on this podcast or material that will help you to gain back your sleep trust, please check out sleeptrust.eu. That's sleeptrust.eu, where you will get lots of information around sleep. And here comes some legal stuff. Everything on this podcast is my opinion only, so do not take it as an advice, as I am not a doctor, nor have I considered your personal situation. If you feel that you need medical advice, please consider getting an appointment at your doctor of trust. If you want to give me any kind of feedback on this podcast, feel free to email me at podcast@sleeptrust.eu. I hope you tune in again next week, and until then, have a good sleep.